Well, you can be the first one to taste karate. And your teacher comes next.
You find the teacher can handle any rubbish that you care to send him. And you don't scare me one bit.
Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. It is time for a Blu-ray review, Hell to the Yes. I am really excited to talk to you about this movie. It's the Chinese Boxer. So you'll know if you watch this channel that I'm not super familiar with Jimmy Wang Yu. And I had never seen this film. I had never seen the One-Arm Boxer, which you can see behind me here, which was released by Eureka earlier this year. I have seen the One-Armed Swordsman, and I've seen Zatoichi versus the One-Armed Swordsman, but that's kind of it for Jimmy Wang Yu film. So I'm really excited that these editions are coming out from Eureka and 8088 because first of all, these movies are incredible. I loved this movie. I'm going to talk about the physical presentation here. I'm going to give you my thoughts about the film. Then I'll talk about the bonus features that are on here. But I love these movies and I love learning about Jimmy Wang Yu's career. He's such an interesting figure and he was so pivotal in the early history of these films. And I think was later eclipsed by a lot of other stars like Bruce Lee, obviously, and then people like Jackie Chan and whatever. It's just really interesting for me as someone who I wasn't alive during the early 70s, right? Who didn't see these films as they were coming out to be able to revisit and learn all of this history. So you have the Kung Fu Bob artwork here that is absolutely incredible. This is a US and UK release. So this is a Region A and a Region B release from 88. So if you're someone who has not picked up any 88 films releases because you're Region A and you don't have a region free player, guess what? Buy this now. I got this I think on Amazon US and it was like $20 and it plays on my Region A player. So you can see here it says A and B at the bottom. And so Kung Fu Bob artwork, which is amazing as always. I love this. I love this slipcover too. It's kind of a matte finish, so it feels really nice. It's a nice texture, and I'm not getting a lot of glare on it on the camera, which is really nice too. And I did flip the poster over because come on, that artwork is badass. Hell yeah. And then you have the same kind of back cover here, and then you open it up and there's the disc and there's the booklet, and the booklet has an essay in it by Andrew Grace. And again, this is like matte finish printed booklet, and I really, really like the quality of the paper here. I like the smell of paper. I talk about that a lot. And I like the quality of the printed images. They look really, really good. So the essay here is Hong Kong's famous fight life. And so this is all about the historical importance of this film, about Jimmy Wang Yu's career, about how influential he was, about how influential his early films as a director were. So he wrote and directed and this is Lo Lei with like the most amazing kind of like strawberry blonde, almost like redheaded auburn haired wig ever. It's like amazing. Anyway, he plays the villain in this film. So it's a really good essay that does it brings in a lot of other titles to tell you about like influences on this film, the continuum of martial arts films and why this film was so important. And that's kind of the running theme of all of the bonus features on this release. The historical importance of this film, the historical importance of Jimmy Wang Yu as an actor and as a writer and a director. Now, to give you a very brief bit of information about the plot of this film, Jimmy Wang Yu plays a student at a martial arts school. He's a guy who lives in this kind of small provincial town, and this very bad guy shows up and he challenges the master of the school, and the master of the school gives him a little bit of a whooping. So the guy returns with 3 karate experts from Japan. The Japanese are the villains yet again, and they basically kill everyone except for Jimmy Wang Yu. So, woo, it's a massacre, baby. Yeah, shades of Kill Bill all over this movie. Obviously a huge influence on Tarantino. And then Jimmy Wang Yu trains and he goes out for revenge. It's a pretty simple plot. So I loved this movie. I cannot say enough positive things about this film. I am kind of astounded that this is the first film that Jimmy Wang Yu wrote and directed. His mastery of like the form of cinema is incredible. And what I love so much about this film is that it foregrounds cinema, the form of cinema. It is about camera and movement and light and sound to create excitement energy, violence. Like, it is a visceral, brutal film. This is not about putting a camera down on a tripod and letting great martial artists fight. This is about zooms and pans and cameras moving on tracks and like reverse parallax, which is when the camera is going this way and objects are going this way and you have objects in the frame and you're creating all these fields of movement. It's a very dynamic, like, living thing. And it's very visceral. And the martial arts hit hard as shit. Like, people are thrown through walls. There's blood everywhere they get. Like, people's fists go through people's bodies. There's axes. There's chains. Like, people are thrown through tables, through banisters. Things are lit on fire. Like, this is a violent, visceral, brutal film that is about the impact of cinema. There's, like, hard editing. There's freeze frames. There's, like, really aggressive, blunt musical cues that just flare up out of nowhere. Like, he's throwing everything at the wall that he has in the arsenal of a filmmaker, and basically all of it sticks. And it's really incredible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the influence of Japanese cinema on this film, because if you know, I almost started Japanese Cinema Appreciation Society. It really kind of did come down to a coin toss, and actually, ironically, maybe I'm more qualified to talk about Japanese cinema because I lived in Japan. I studied art history and Japanese as an undergrad, so my undergraduate degree is basically in like Japanese art, literature, film, photography, and the cultural history of how these things kind of all interconnect and stuff like that. And so I see so much influence on Jimmy Wang Yu from Japanese cinema. So obviously we have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Akira Kurosawa. Now, David West does an interview on this Blu-ray where he talks a lot about the historical importance of the film and the influences on the film and stuff like that. And he talks a lot about Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 as being a huge influence on this film. That is Kurosawa's third film. I think it came out in 1945. So in 43 was Sanshiro Sugata, 44 was The Most Beautiful, and then Kurosawa had two films in 45. One was Sanshiro Sugata Part 2, and one was The Man Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail. So, although I don't think that came out until 1950 because it was banned for depicting feudal life. Because when SCAP, which is the Supreme Commander of Allied Powers, came, it was basically like MacArthur. When they took over in Japan after the war, they banned the depiction of like samurai and feudal life and stuff like that in cinema because they thought that it would engender feelings of allegiance to the emperor, which they believed was what got Japan into the war in the first place. They ended up relaxing on those restrictions like later on. Obviously, Rashomon came out, but 1952 is really technically the end of the post-war period. And there are films depicting samurai that came out before that. But you don't see a lot in like 45, 46, 47. You see a lot of those contemporary films like Stray Dog and stuff like that. So Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 is a film in which a judo expert fights a karate expert. And you have both judo and karate people in the Chinese Boxer, right? And you have the snow in Chinese Boxer, which is, David West talks a lot about Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 using snow and the final fight and how the final fights are very similar. And all of that is completely true. However, I might argue that the use of weather in this film in general is a direct influence from Japanese cinema and maybe not specifically stolen from Sanshiro Sugata Part 2. Kurosawa uses weather basically all the time. The rain in Seven Samurai, right? Redbeard has tons, like there's snow in Redbeard. There's tons of weather in that film. The wind in Yojimbo. He uses wind a lot. The wind in Ran. Obviously, Ran came out years after this film. But most of these classic Kurosawa films like The Fog and the wind and the rain that's in Throne of Blood, a lot of these films came out before the Chinese Boxer and Jimmy Wang. You would have seen and been familiar with these films. The howling wind in certain scenes in the Chinese Boxer, it's so Japanese, and it makes me think of like Samurai Assassin. It makes me think of Sword of Doom. Jimmy Wang Yu also really, really intelligently utilizes silence in this film, which is a very Japanese thing. If you look at movies like Harakiri, if you look at movies like Sword of Doom, Samurai Assassin, all those classic Kurosawa films, there's so much expert use of silence to build tension and slow zooms and slow, like tracking movements of the camera. And he uses all of that stuff so well here in a way that is not evocative of other Shaw Brothers films. really feels very Japanese. He also uses horizontal space in a way that feels very Japanese. Japanese architecture is actually really given to cinema as a medium because widescreen is very horizontal and it's crushed vertically, right? And Japanese architecture tends to be long and wide and deep. And so you have these rooms in traditional Japanese houses that are perfect for staging scenes in cinema because they lend themselves to that format. And Jimmy Wang Yu really uses the wide horizontal format here to cinematically emphasize the points that he's making. I also would be really surprised if he had never seen a Zatoichi film before, because the plot of this film is basically the plot of every Zatoichi movie. So Zatoichi is this wandering swordsman, right? And he wanders around from town to town in the Japanese countryside, and inevitably he comes upon a town where the Yakuza have come in, and they've taken over, and they've opened a gambling den, a whorehouse, or some combination of both of those things. And they try to, get all the women to be geishas and prostitutes, and they try to enslave them basically through forcing them into debt and things of that nature. And then the men they put into the gambling house, and they try to take all their money away and put them in debt to them so that they control them, and they just take all their rice and all their food, and everyone's starving and has no money, and people are committing suicide and all this stuff. And then Zatoichi comes and he sees what's going on, and he's a good guy, and he fucking kills everyone with his sword. It's awesome. That's basically what's going on in this movie. You have these really bad guys who come into town and they wipe out the local martial arts school specifically so that they can open a gambling den, and then they just force people into debt, and they create this cycle of poverty and servitude and debt, right? And horrible things happen, and then Jimmy Wang Yu comes to the rescue. I also forgot to mention when I was mentioning the snow fight, like I said, David West really emphasizes the influence of Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 on this film, and I'm not going to disagree with that at all, but Samurai Assassin, I think, has probably the greatest snow fight of all time. And there are a lot of Japanese movies with really great snow fights. And in Harakiri, you have a lot of wind. Again, I talked about the wind in this film. And there's that scene with Tatsuya Nakadai where they're walking through the cemetery, and then they walk through the woods and into the field, and there's all this wind blowing, and there's just so much weather in these classic Japanese films. And I think that Jimmy Wang Yu is obviously very clearly indebted to that lineage. There's also a scene in this film that really reminded me of Stray Dog. If you've seen Stray Dog, that's a Kurosawa film from 1949, I believe, with Toshiro Mifune and Takashi Shimura, and Minoru Chiaki is in that film too. He's in a bunch of Kurosawa movies. And in that movie, there's a scene where Takashi Shimura, who plays the older cop, invites Toshiro Mifune, who's a younger cop, over to his house, and they drink and they have dinner, and he meets his wife and all that stuff. There's a scene in this movie where before all the bad stuff happens, the mentor slash Sifu, of the Jimmy Wang Yu character invites him and his friend over for dinner, and his daughter comes and serves them food, and they're drinking not sake, but they're drinking wine of some kind. And it really, the way it's shot, the tone of it, the music of it, it really reminded me of that scene in Stray Dog. So again, this movie just really feels like it's in constant dialogue with cinema from all around the world. Huge Japanese influence. I also see some maybe Eurospy and James Bond influence. I don't know if Jimmy Wang Yu was actually watching those films, but the way that the fight scenes are cut and edited, and the way that the hard cuts and the freeze frames and the sudden music flaring up, it really reminds me of early Bond, and the visceral kind of brutal nature of those fights, like in Thunderball and Goldfinger and stuff like that, especially in the train fight in From Russia with Love. And it really seems like he's watching all of these movies and taking everything in, and he has such a strong sense of character and narrative. Every fight scene in this movie has a beginning, a middle, and end. It tells a story. It has a purpose. The characters have goals. There are points of escalation. It'll start as a fist fight, and then people will introduce weapons, and then people will start dying, and then that causes desperation, which everything builds, and everything has a reason, and everything is going somewhere. It's a really well constructed and conceived and written and directed and acted film. Above and beyond being a fun martial arts film, it's just a really fucking good movie. Now, I do have to say, and I think I would be remiss not to mention this, there is a rape scene in this movie, and I know that a lot of people may find that disturbing, or they might not want to watch this movie because of that. And actually, Sam Deegan, in her audio commentary, she talks quite a bit about the rape scene and how it plays into a theme of racism towards the Japanese that you see in a lot of these movies, and that is in this film, which is ironic, right? Because Jimmy Wang Yu is so influenced by Japanese cinema. There is a strong current of racism towards the Japanese in this film, which you see a lot, which obviously in part goes back to World War II and the horrible things that the Japanese did in Hong Kong, in China during World War II. And I'm not going to get into all of that, but if you know, you know, and if you don't, you can go and read about it. But it suffices to say, there is a rape scene in this film. It didn't take me out of the movie. It's not very graphic. It's not very long. I did not find it particularly disturbing. There are lots of films with sexual violence in them that I can't do. Like, I have skipped scenes of sexual violence in movies before, and Untold Story, I mean, I talked about that before on this channel. There's a rape scene in that movie. I was like, I just can't watch this. Like, it's too disturbing. It's too drawn out. It's too brutal and dark. And in this film, too, the rape scene does have very kind of tragic and brutal consequences. So just the way that it was handled in this film, I did not find to be disturbing. But that doesn't mean that you won't find it disturbing. So I just want to put it out there that it's in the film in case that's something that you want to look out for or be aware of. So that's kind of my 2 cents on this film. To talk about the bonus features, the movie looks incredible. Like, it looks incredible. This remaster is fantastic. And I watched it on my TV, as I said before on the channel. I think I have a 59-inch TV, so it looks pretty good on a big TV. It looks fantastic. David West has a 17-minute interview, and he talks a lot about the Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 and the Kurosawa stuff, like I said. And he talks about the context of this film, how this film was such a big thing because it foregrounded fist fighting instead of weapons work and sword fighting, and how it was a really kind of grounded character-based portrayal of these things, of serious violence and brutality, rather than being a kind of more of a fantasy wuxia type film. And he talks about, there was actually one other film that came out before this movie in 1970 that foregrounded fist fighting and knife fighting and stuff over the traditional sword fighting and stuff. And so these movies together kind of created this trend going forward, and how this movie influenced Bruce Lee. There's also a really interesting analysis of Jackie Chan and how the way that Jimmy Wang Yu plays characters in his own films is similar to what Jackie Chan has done in some of his own films too. That was really interesting because I never thought of that, but I definitely see the connection. And as you know, Jimmy Wang Yu and Jackie Chan have a very long-standing relationship because Jimmy Wang Yu helped Jackie Chan get out of his contract with Low-Way Films, and that story is told in David West's interview, and it's an awesome story. So Wang Qing is in here. He's a 14-minute long interview, and he just talks basically about his career and all these amazing people he worked with and all these amazing films that he is in. If you are unfamiliar with him, he was in Spiritual Kung Fu, which you'll see, I think, is right here behind me, which is a Jackie Chan film. He was in Shaolin Temple. He was in Warriors 2, Five Fingers of Death, Prodigal Boxer, One-Armed Swordsman, Golden Swallow, The Heroic Ones, Vengeance. This movie, like, yeah, this dude is like an absolute legend of these films, and he talks about his whole career. It's a really cool interview. So just between those 2 bonus features, that's 31 minutes. There's the original English language trailer. There's the original Hong Kong trailer. And there's an American TV spot, I think, I think it's an American TV spot that's like really, really cool. But all those trailers are really awesome. They're like classic, like early 70s trailers, and like with the music, and like they haven't been remastered, so you can really see like the grain of the film print. It's like really, really cool. And then the commentary track. So like I said, the commentary track is done by Sam Deegan, who I'm not super familiar with. I know she does a lot of horror stuff and podcasts and things of that nature, and she's also an author. And what she does in her commentary track is she kind of analyzes the film as she's going, while also contextualizing it within the career of Jimmy Wang Yu and within the kind of the continuum of martial arts films and Shaw Brothers films and Hong Kong cinema and stuff like that. And she talks a lot about like the racism towards the Japanese. She analyzes the rape scene. She goes through a lot of the stuff that you're watching and breaks it down, while also talking about the careers of people involved in the historical context of the film. So I really enjoyed that, and I got quite a bit out of that commentary track. So this is the Chinese BOXER release from 88 Films. It was released in November of 2021, so it is a brand new release. This is like my new favorite movie. I know I said that about Duel to the Death too, but hey, I can have 2 new favorite movies, right? Like, I loved it. This is a fantastic release. 88 Films releases are never expensive. There's no reason not to go and get this. It is Region A and Region B availability. It's Jimmy Wang Yu. It's the Chinese BOXER. My name is Will. This is Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. As always, I thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.